Good afternoon. I'm Shelby Coffey, Vice Chairman of the Newseum. I want to welcome you all to the Knight Conference Center here at the Newseum. I'd like to start out with just one bit of audience participation. If I could have a show of hands of how many people here think Jack Gerard ordered up this weather to get more attention paid to his speech. There we go. Yeah, the people who know him best right at these tables are all in. Well, back in the day, I used to be the editor of the Los Angeles Times, so I am used to seeing Hollywood stars do almost anything to get your attention, from Sharon Stone to Brad Pitt. But I would say Mr. Gerard may have topped them all with getting the lowest temperature in 20 years here in Washington just to get attention. For this. We are delighted to have, again, the annual presentation of the State of American Energy here at the Newseum. A bit of housekeeping. I'd like to welcome our guests who are watching this event online and encourage them to submit questions that they may have via the hashtag SOAE2014. That's hashtag SOAE2014. Just one of the interesting elements of our tech lives that we have to start out with that. The rest of us in the room will have Q&A cards, which are located at your tables, and you can ask Jack any kind of question related to energy or not. He says he's able to handle them all, and we're ready. It's fitting that this important and timely discussion be held at the Newseum here in our nation's capital, which is a temple to the First Amendment and free expression. As we all know, issues related to energy appear in newsprint and on the airwaves daily. API alone has tens of thousands of mentions per year. It would be a tall order, in fact, to try to quantify how often the coverage surrounding energy goes over our airwaves, because it's such a relevant topic. It's one that affects every individual, and in fact, in a number of the other distinguished conferences we have here at the Newseum, such as the Washington Ideas Forum, which we put on with the Aspen Institute, and Atlantic Media, where we're dealing with everything from international affairs to monetary policy. I see General Jones here, who's been a participant in these in the past. We are dealing with things that get in. Energy is a major element of that, a motif that runs throughout it. And it wasn't that long ago that America had to look, quite importantly and strategically, overseas for foreign sources of oil to meet our energy needs for the nation. Many of us assumed that it would probably always be like that. But today, the United States is quite a bit closer than ever to deciding its own energy destiny. The new energy reality asks us all to decide how we will achieve it. What policies do we need to be pursuing with our elected leaders? What decisions will need to be made by local communities? And what will the oil and natural gas industry itself need to do? Here to answer these important questions and to talk more about the state of American energy for the coming year is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute, the one, the only, the nonpareil, the nearly omniscient, and possible master of the polar vectors, who brought you your 4-degree temperature today, Jack Gerard.
Well, thank you, Shelby, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year to all of you, and thank you for joining us today. Oftentimes, with a glowing introduction, you stand, as you've heard many times before, and others will say, thank you for reading that just the way I wrote it. I will say today, I didn't write anything that Shelby said today, and for those of you who actually believe we brought this weather, it's really not true. We'd like to think we have some influence on policy in Washington, but clearly not on the weather, though I think it is a good reminder of the need for energy and the need for energy self-sufficiency here in the United States. So we appreciate all of you coming. We have a packed house, a full room, so as we huddle together today, we can stay warm knowing that the elements outside are quite cold. Before I begin with my prepared remarks today, I'd like to introduce a few key VIPs or individuals. As we all know, in Washington, everybody's a VIP, but there are a few here today at a few tables right here in front I'd just like to give special recognition to for their leadership role, not only in energy, but in business, labor, and elsewhere generally, for their contribution to our society, to job creation, to all the things that we've come to enjoy and too often take for granted as American citizens. So let me go through a quick list here, and then I'll turn to my remarks. We've all met Shelby. Shelby, thank you very much for hosting us today in this wonderful institution, which is fast becoming a landmark on the Washington scene, though relatively recently. Another Cal Dooley. Many of you know Cal. Would you stand quickly? President and CEO of the American Chemistry Council, former House member from California. Cal, thank you for being here. James Boland, who is also the president of International Union and Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. I've got to read that to make sure I get it right, James. Doug McCarron. Doug's a good friend. He's the general president of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters. Dot Harris. Dot, we've known for a long time, as a great friend and ally of the industry. He's the director of the Office of Economic Impact and Diversity at the Department of Energy, where we're working on initiatives to employ minority communities around the country. And our good friend Admiral Don Lauren, who heads up Veterans for Energy. Admiral, thank you. Then Sean McGarvey, who heads up the Building Construction Trade Department, AFL-CIO, a good friend who leads our labor management group with the oil and gas industry that constitutes over 15 unions where we work together on job creation, economic self-sufficiency here in the country. On our other table over here, many of you know General Jim Jones. Thank you for being here. As you know, the General was the National Security Advisor of the President and has numerous other long lists of credentials in a life of service to the country. Our good friend Tom Donahue, who heads up the U.S. Chamber, great leader in the business community and also focused on the energy equation. Next to him is Bob Costello, the Chief Economist and Vice President of the American Trucking Association. Bob, thank you. And Don Santa, our good friend, the President and CEO of the International Natural Gas Association of America. We know it as INGA for those of us in the acronym world. Marty Durbin, we all know well. We hated to see leave the API, but thank you, Marty, who's now President and CEO of ANGA. Also, Paul Connors, the Trade Commissioner of the Canadian Embassy. And our good friend Amy Luce, the Vice President of Development for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. And last, certainly not least, Barry Russell, who heads up the IPAA, the Independent Petroleum Association of America. So let's give all these distinguished VIPs a round of applause. And thank you for joining us today, and there are many others as I look around the room, former senators, House members, and others. Thank you for being here. Now, as we reflect on the past year, many of us at this time in our lives, most all of us, as we look ahead to the new year, with the holidays behind us, we reflect on the past, but we also look clearly to the future. This time, while the year is just beginning, reminds us that our future is ultimately of our own design. The same holds true for our nation. Our generation will decide if America continues its march towards global energy leadership, a perhaps once-in-a-generation opportunity, or if we'll remain content to play only a supporting role on the global energy marketplace. We can erase what for decades has been one of America's greatest economic vulnerabilities, our dependence on energy sources from other continents, particularly from less stable and less friendly nations, and fundamentally alter the geopolitical landscape for decades to come, all while providing a much-needed boost to our domestic economy. But this is only achievable and possible if we get energy policy right in this country. Today, thanks to the innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit of America's oil and natural gas industry, this nation has the potential to shed the yoke of foreign energy dependence. Implementing smart, pro-growth energy policies will help us ensure that future Americans only know their country as the energy leader. In other words, elections matter. Elections have consequences. In exactly 10 months, we will choose who will lead this nation, here in Washington, D.C., and in state and local governments all across our land. Those choices will have a lasting and profound impact on the direction of our nation's energy policy. The collective decisions of the 2014 voters will help shape whether and the extent to which our nation fulfills its potential as the world's energy superpower. To lead the energy policy discussion and educate the public on the game-changing significance of the choices our nation faces, API's 2014 messaging and advocacy theme will be America's Energy, America's Choice. It distills America's energy policy discussion down to a basic choice: an American energy future of energy abundance, self-sufficiency, and global leadership, or reverting to the past of energy scarcity, dependence, and economic uncertainty. It is fundamentally that simple. Our underlying message is equally simple. Energy is fundamental to our society, to our way of life. And thanks to American innovation and the entrepreneurial spirit shown by our industry and many others, our nation stands among the world's leaders in energy production and is poised to be the leader well into the future if we get the policy right. The question before us today is whether we have the vision and the wisdom to take full advantage of our vast energy resources. The energy policy choices we make today are among the most important and far-reaching policy decisions we will make in the 21st century. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reshape, to realign, and reorder the world's energy market and improve domestic prosperity to an unprecedented degree. If we are to continue our nation's current positive energy production trends, we must implement energy policies based on the current realities and our potential as an energy leader, not on the outdated political ideology of professional environmental fringe groups or political dilettantes. American energy policy should reflect the reality that someone somewhere will benefit from helping meet the world's energy growing needs. Because, make no mistake, energy, and more specifically oil and natural gas, will remain foundational to our way of life. Broadly, demand for energy worldwide will continue its upward trajectory. For the foreseeable future, we will need more energy from all sources: from wind, from solar, from oil, from natural gas, nuclear, coal, biofuels, and the list goes on. All these are needed to meet what we see taking place around the ever-expanding economies around the globe. According to the President's Energy Information Administration, 25 years from now, oil and natural gas will still be responsible for providing over 60% of our nation's energy, and it will provide more than 90% of our transportation fuels. Worldwide, EIA projects demand for liquid fuels will increase by 20% in the next 20 years, driven primarily by the development of emerging markets and nations, as many of them seek to lift themselves out of poverty, improve their standard of living, and increase the economic opportunity for all their citizens. It should be a simple choice. Do we as a nation decide to use our vast energy resources to help meet the world's growing energy needs and in the process boost our global competitiveness? Do we realign our foreign policy goals and our national security considerations? Do we encourage America's 21st century manufacturing renaissance? Do we provide millions more Americans with good, well-paying jobs? And do we continue to provide billions of dollars in revenue to federal, state, and local governments in the coming decades? Or will we choose once again to revert to the past of energy insecurity, energy scarcity, and dependence upon past practices? In my view, those on the side of America's 21st century energy renaissance have a few considerable advantages. First and foremost, the facts. Fact: today, hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, or what some like to call simplistically fracking, the United States has created the United States as the #1 producer of oil and natural gas. Just this year, North Dakota produced more than 1 million barrels of oil a day, which, if it were a country, would rank it in the top 20 in the world. Fact: U.S. production of crude and natural gas liquids has increased by over 2 million barrels a day in the last 2 years, an almost 27% increase, reducing our reliance from over 60% to less than 34% today on outside sources. Fact: according to the Energy Information Administration, in 2001, 1% of our natural gas supply came from shale. In 2010, that percentage grew to 20%, and by 2035 is expected to grow to 45%, thanks in large part to our technological leadership, which the rest of the world is now seeking to emulate. Hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's often called, is essential to the American Renaissance in the production of American oil and natural gas. Also, in what is clearly a politically motivated disconnect between today's much-changed energy landscape and the political orthodoxy of some, in my view, views of the past, who continue to push for arbitrary and unfair limits or outright bans on energy exports. It is a position that flouts the facts. Fact: according to the latest census data, which was just released this morning, the oil and natural gas sector is now the nation's leading exporting sector, and has contributed more than $129 billion during the 11 months of 2013 towards our trade imbalance. It leads all other export sectors and today accounts for 8.9% of our total exports. In this data released this morning, we learned this has reduced our trade imbalance by over 16%, bringing us to a 4-year low. We are the single largest contributor to now achieving the President's vision of doubling exports from the United States. And here's one last remaining fact, a most important one in my mind. The American people get it, and they stand with us on today's most important energy policy questions. They understand that pro-growth energy policies will translate into millions of stable, good-paying jobs, which would go a long way to lowering unemployment and shrinking the income inequality gap, which is shaping up to be a central theme of this year's election. The truth is, the average upstream job in the oil and natural gas industry pays 7 times the minimum wage in the United States. It is little wonder that according to recent polls, 77% of all Americans want to see this nation increase our domestic production of our oil and natural gas. 92% of American voters have concluded the development of our energy resources provides and will continue to provide hundreds of thousands, indeed millions, of good-paying jobs now and well into the future. And on perhaps the highest profile issue within the American energy policy discussion today, 69% of the voters support building the Keystone XL pipeline, something Shelby and I were talking about a moment ago here at the table. This has gone on for far too long. And in speaking of Keystone, with all due respect to the administration, I'd like to point out that this now 5+ year evaluation process of this pipeline has lasted longer than America's involvement in the Second World War, longer than it took our nation to put a man in space, and almost as much time as it took us to build the Transcontinental Railroad over 155 years ago. In other words, far too long for a project that will create jobs, grow the economy, and ultimately expand our nation's ability to take full advantage of our nation's bright energy future. It's a good example of why policy matters and how dogmatic adherence to political ideology can trump economic reality to the detriment of millions of hardworking individuals who aspire nothing more than to feed their families, to educate them, and to have some sense of a quality of life. The fact is, with a single word, the word yes, the President could allow this vital infrastructure project, paid for by the private sector and without a dime of taxpayer money, to move forward and provide thousands of good-paying jobs for many years to come. If we are truly concerned about income inequality, here's an easy way to begin to close the gap. Broadly, the Keystone XL pipeline debate highlights the need to invest in our energy's infrastructure today to support job growth, economic growth, and increased government revenue. I would refer you to the booklet that we've handed out today. A summary of this report is included in it. A report just recently concluded by IHS Global, which shows that an annual average energy infrastructure investment of up to $95 billion, which is realistic in the current context, would contribute as much as $120 billion to U.S. GDP, support as many as 1.1 million new jobs in America, and provide an additional $27 billion in government revenue on average every year between now and 2025. This is a big deal. Infrastructure is essential, critical to our well-being, and can be added upon what we do in the production of oil and natural gas. Not surprisingly, the consistent polling data showing strong public support and the results of multiple studies reporting the significant positive economic benefit of expanded energy production have spurred more and more members of Congress from all regions and from both political parties to support increased domestic energy production. Case in point, going back to our topic of Keystone Pipeline, just last year, both chambers, by wide margins, on bipartisan margins, passed measures urging the President to approve the Keystone XL pipeline, proving that even during a time of hyperpartisanship and polarization, energy is one of those areas where we should be able to rally as a nation, putting aside our different philosophies, our different ideologies, and our different political banners, and begin to support that which is best for the good of the nation, for the good of the country. The public's strong support and our ability to cut through the partisan noise and the stale ideology of our critics is due to our ongoing outreach and educational efforts surrounding this great renaissance we've talked about, this factor, this game-changing opportunity, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to develop our own resources to become the world's energy superpower. As we look ahead to November's midterm election and beyond, we will use America's Energy, America's Choice campaign to spur more pro-energy policies, to engage the American people, and to ensure that our nation's discussion on energy policy is based on fact and reality. The new facts, the new reality, not political orthodoxy or hyperbole. What's more, there's another fact on our side. The benefits that Americans' energy revolution has already delivered. The best example being the significant reduction of America's CO2 emissions, which are at their lowest levels in nearly 20 years, thanks largely to the abundant supply of cleaner burning natural gas, a direct result of innovations in technology that allow us today, through hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, to drill hundreds of thousands of wells to produce a low-cost, affordable, cleaner-burning form of energy. Further, since 2000, the oil and natural gas sector has spent more on low-carbon and zero-carbon emitting technologies than the federal government has, and nearly as much as all other industries combined. These are private sector dollars being invested in technologies. We can debate the role of government and the expense of taxpayers' dollars to pursue these technologies, but I want to emphasize the oil and natural gas industry is a leader in zero-carbon emitting, low-carbon emitting technologies. In fact, 1 out of every $6 invested in non-hydrocarbon technology comes from the oil and gas industry. Since 1990, our industry has invested $252 billion toward improving the environmental performance of our products, our operations, and our facilities. What we want and what the American public deserve is energy policy that continues the trend of our nation becoming energy self-sufficient and indeed the global energy leader. The America's Energy, America's Choice campaign sends a message to lawmakers at all levels of government that the time to end the intrusion of extreme political ideology or personal agendas in the energy policy debate is now, and that the only limits on our nation's energy potential will be those that are self-imposed by short-sighted, politically motivated energy policy decisions. Again, the American public and future generations deserve better. America's Energy, America's Choice will harness the collective will and wisdom of the American voter to lead the discussion on our nation's bright energy future and to better align our nation's political science with our geologic science. Because right now, the former all too often drives our energy policy. It will use the upcoming midterm elections as a means to frame and to positively influence the long-term energy policy discussion, educating the American people and encouraging them to take time from their busy lives to engage in the political process, to educate those elected to represent them, to do the right thing, to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Because after all, voting is about vision. It's an act of optimism. Our goal is to ensure that as our elected representatives and appointed officials make energy policy, the will of the American people will be uppermost in their mind and a dominant voice in the public debate. And to make clear the link between developing America's vast energy resources and greater energy independence, job creation, and economic growth. Fundamentally, America's Energy, America's Choice will make plain the energy policy choice we face. Do we more fully develop our enormous energy resources right here at home so that future generations inherit an energy self-sufficient nation that's the world's leader in energy production? Or do we take a step back in time when America was but one of many players on the global world energy market? In my view, it would be unforgivable if this country were to abandon or ignore its responsibility to future generations by missing this opportunity based on flawed science, outdated assumptions, and political orthodoxy. Helping to lead the change we seek and encouraging American lawmakers to take full advantage of America's energy renaissance is at the core of the American Petroleum Institute's mission today and well into the future. It is America's energy. It is America's choice. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to entertaining your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. We have a couple of questions, but there's still some people collecting cards if you have any. Today, exports are in the news, and the possible exports of crude oil. On exports, U.S. production is only recently at record levels. Why not wait and pause and go at a more deliberate speed before considering exporting crude oil or increasing exports of LNG?
Great question. And let me say, it not only is it current in the news today, I think many of you have heard Senator Murkowski gave a speech this morning and talked specifically about this issue. To paraphrase some of her words, she said, we need to modernize America's energy policy. This is a perfect example of what we need to do in this country as we look at those prohibitions or those limitations on our ability to achieve our full potential. Today, our import reliance has gone from 60 to 34%. It is a significant move. But what we should also look at is how we bring more of this vast domestic U.S. supply to the global marketplace. The free market is the best factor to determine price and supply and demand equations. The worst thing for the government to do right now is to distort the marketplace. We see today, as I mentioned earlier, we have now reduced the imbalance of our trades today by 16% because of the export primarily of refined product. We should look at all options. We should consider the export limitations on crude oil today, just as we're seeking to expand LNG exports from this country. It should be part of that energy mix. It should not be bound by past practices or the visions of the Arab oil embargo in the 1970s. It's a new day. It's a new time. It's a new America as it relates to oil and gas. We should consider and review quickly the role of crude exports along with LNG exports and finished products exports because of the advantages it creates for this country in job creation and in our balance of payments.
On the Keystone Pipeline, in your remarks, you mentioned three items: the bipartisan support in Congress, polls showing that most people support the pipeline, and 4 previous OKs from the State Department. Two-part question. I'm combining questions. Number 1, why is it still delayed, and what will you be doing in 2014 to gain approval?
First part of the question, I wished I could answer that. Why is it still being delayed? I think we're as frustrated as anybody else is, but we will not give up. Back to the second part of the question, we will continue to push consistent with where the American people are. As I mentioned earlier, 69% support approval of the Keystone XL pipeline. In the words of Canadian Prime Minister Harper, he said, this is a no-brainer. This is clearly a no-brainer. Today we're having a debate in the Congress, and we will, I believe, over the next year over the question of income inequality. Our jobs in the oil and natural gas industry, particularly on the upstream of the production side, pay 7 times what minimum wage is today. This, with one simple word, the word yes, would approve thousands of jobs, well-paying jobs, would help us to begin to close this gap. We've worked closely with Sean, with Doug, and many others seated around these tables today in organized labor to create these jobs. We're unified. This is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's an American issue, but it's key to our success, and it's fundamental to sending the signal not only to this nation but the world as to how we will handle our energy policy going forward, and will we rise to the occasion to truly achieve the potential of becoming the superpower around the globe.
There's a lot of talk about the Keystone Pipeline, but there is another pipeline that is important to the oil and natural gas industry, and that's the Alaska Pipeline. Given the declining throughput of the pipeline, what is your vision of its future as it's related to America's energy policy?
Clearly, Alaska is key in a vast energy resource for us that has gone, in many ways, underutilized for many years. We need to continue to focus on Alaska. The role of federal and state governments is key in Alaska, as the vast majority of the state, as you know, is controlled by primarily the federal government as well as the state government. But when we look at the transatlantic pipeline, it's a resource that is now underutilized because we're not producing enough to keep it at full capacity. We should look to those existing infrastructures to expand, to achieve our potential, but we should also look to the new infrastructure debate. As I mentioned earlier, in your packet today, we're sharing with you a recent IHS Global report that shows we could create close to 1 million new jobs by building the pipeline networks, not only in Alaska and elsewhere, but clear across this country to safely move product, to allow it to be refined, to allow it to be consumed, to allow it to be affordable and reliable for all America. So Alaska is key to this equation. It should not be overlooked. The transatlantic pipeline is currently underutilized. We should look for opportunities there, and this also brings us back to the question of crude exports. A policy needs to be reviewed because of the potential.
You mentioned the investments in infrastructure and the report going out today. It seems harder and harder to get local infrastructure projects built. What policy changes are needed to ensure that investments can actually translate to projects?
Well, there's a lot of policy that needs to be looked at. Much of this is managed at the local level, combination of environmental permitting, et cetera. What we need to do in the country, though, is to escape what's taking place today, and that is those who would seek to stop the development of oil and natural gas have used the permitting processes as proxies or surrogates to begin to stop this economic activity. We need to review all statutes, regulatory activity, and focus on their primary purpose, to safely protect our workforce, to safely protect our environment, but to also to come to a point of decision to approve these opportunities. I hate to keep talking about the Keystone XL pipeline, but it's the wrong model. If it takes us 5 years, if it takes us extended period of times, because of political considerations, we will limit our ability to achieve our potential as a nation and frankly discourage the investment that's lining the shores of this country to come here to develop these vast resources to put our people to work. It couldn't happen at a better time. Now's the time to do it. We need to look at all regulations and law to bring about an affirmative final decision on these processes and on these permits.
On the renewable fuel standard, we had a couple questions, so I'm going to try to combine into one. EPA recently lowered the volumes to avoid the ethanol blend wall. Do you believe that ethanol is playing a role in our increasing energy security? And if so, why is the oil industry urging the EPA to go lower than 10%?
Well, a couple answers very quickly. The reason the API and others are encouraging the EPA to go below 10% is because the vast majority of all automobiles and vehicles in the United States were built to consume up to 10% ethanol, and only up to 10% ethanol. When they surveyed the auto manufacturers and said, if we allowed a blend beyond 10%, would you warranty those 250 million automobiles and light trucks in the country today? And every auto manufacturer at the time said, no, we will not. We will not honor our warranties if you go beyond 10%. The renewable fuel standard is an issue that's focused on consumers. This is a consumer issue. We're the ones that are put in the crosshairs, the refiners and the processors, to produce gasoline, diesel fuel that we consume every day. But it impacts consumers. That's why you see opposition from small business owners, from marine individuals, from farmers, from the turkey farmers, the chicken producers, chain restaurants and others, because what was supposed to be a fuels policy, all the foundation that was set on to lower imports, to reduce greenhouse gases, that reality has changed in just the past 5 years. So the renewable fuel standard needs to be repealed, it needs to be altered, and I give credit to the administration for having the courage to step forward in this most recent rulemaking and recognize what we call the blend wall that would have pushed us through this 10% blend, to say enough is enough, this is harmful to the American public, we shouldn't allow this to continue.
On taxes, do you think that tax reform can move forward in 2014? And if so, what would you like to see part of the discussion?
I do not believe tax reform will occur in 2014. How's that, Linda? I'm sure nobody else in this room believes what I just said either, do they? Tax reform is important for the country and to make us globally competitive in a global environment. However, from an oil and gas perspective, the worst thing we could do today is to treat the oil and gas industry in a punitive way. If you look in the report we handed out today, the oil and natural gas industry pays a 44.6% tax rate on a global scale. We pay not only our fair share, we pay more than our fair share. We pay $85 million a day to the federal government. We are making a contribution. We can continue to create well-paying jobs and allow others to make additional contributions. So a tax policy that singles out an individual industry is wrong-headed, and it's going in the wrong direction. The likelihood, in my view, humble but correct opinion, is that it is unlikely that anything will happen in 2014 in a comprehensive way.
Regarding your
Tom agrees with me.
Regarding your report and the America's Energy, America's Choice campaign, is this going to include ratings of congressional candidates for office?
We support all political candidates who support oil and natural gas and understand the vision and the potential for this country. So to date, we currently do not rate, and we will not use this opportunity to rate particular members. I will tell you, as we look at potential contributions, as we look at support for members, we look very closely at one thing. It's called the voting record. As I mentioned earlier, elections matter. Elections translate to votes. Votes matter. I believe the Congress and the administration are lagging indicators. I believe the American public sets the agenda in our society and in this country, and it all happens at the polling booth. America's Energy, America's Choice is designed to continue to educate the American people and to encourage them to participate in the democratic processes that elect those officials who come here to represent those interests. When you see over 70% of the American public saying we should produce more of the nation's oil and natural gas industry, there's clearly a disconnect in policy formulation and the will of the American public. We believe by encouraging the American public, it makes for good, sound public policy, and that's where our primary focus will be on America's Energy, America's Choice campaign.
And the last question, you spoke a lot about the need for more U.S. oil and natural gas in our energy supply to address the challenges of the future and our opportunities. With increased domestic production, what is the role of energy efficiency in contributing to our energy security?
Energy efficiency is key to our entire energy equation. It should be a component part, just like all forms of energy should be a component part. Today, we produce twice as much GDP activity for the same amount of energy that we did in 1980. We as a nation are more energy efficient today than we have ever been. Now, that doesn't mean we stop. We need to continue to become more and more energy efficient over time. However, we have to be realistic that it does require energy to fuel our economy, to heat our homes, to provide the lights, all the added value products that Cal and his members and many of you others here in the business community provide. Energy is essential to our economy. It's essential to our well-being, and energy efficiency is a key component of that broader equation, but it is one component, and we shouldn't overlook the others, including oil and gas, which provides over 60% of that energy today. So thank you very much, Linda. Let me just conclude by thanking you all for your participation, for being here today. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I hope some of what we have said today will not only resonate, but perhaps help us all think a little more about the new energy reality, the opportunity we have that we can engage together as Americans, not as Democrats and Republicans, but as Americans seeking to put our nation on a sure footing for the benefit of all of our citizens. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.